Something fractured at 2:17 am Eastern, on the morning of March 9, 2026, when Iranian state television interrupted every scheduled broadcast without warning, and a uniformed IRGC commander appeared on screen flanked by black-robed clerics, and read 4 sentences that simultaneously detonated inside intelligence operations from Washington to Tel Aviv to Moscow. Iran had named its new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, 56 years old, the biological son of the man America and Israel killed 12 days ago, and within hours of assuming the most consequential position in the Islamic Republic, he transmitted a message to Washington that every major network reduced to a single sentence and immediately moved past. We are not moving past it. Because the full unedited transcript of what Mojtaba Khamenei actually said, circulated by Iranian state media and cross-verified by independent Persian language journalists, contains specific language that never made it into English language coverage. And that language tells you something about the trajectory of this war that nothing you have read today has given you sufficient framework to process. Here is where we stand as of March 9th, and every layer of this matters. On the night of March 8th at 11:47 p.m. Tehran time, 2:17 a.m. Eastern, Iran's Assembly of Experts, the 88-member clerical body holding sole constitutional authority over supreme leadership selection, convened its final emergency session. The confirmation came with institutional speed. Iranian state television read the announcement, and within minutes, here is the sequencing that every intelligence analyst flagged immediately. The IRGC issued its formal pledge of allegiance. Not the civilian government, not parliament, not the presidential office. The IRGC pledged loyalty first, before every other Iranian institution had processed the announcement. That ordering was not administrative. That ordering was the opening statement of who actually controls Iran right now. By 3 a.m. Eastern, every major global outlet had confirmed the appointment. By 4 a.m., Asian oil markets opened and Brent crude jumped $12 per barrel in the first 60 minutes of trading. By 6 a.m., the U.S. State Department issued a travel security alert ordering non-emergency government personnel and their families to begin departure procedures from multiple Gulf region countries. By 7 a.m., the Pentagon confirmed the 7th American military death of the conflict. And by 9 a.m. on March 9th, the new supreme leader of Iran had delivered his inaugural address, designating documented American military casualties as Iranian victories, and stating Iran's formal war objective as the complete and unconditional withdrawal of all American military forces from the entire Middle East. That is not a negotiating position. That is a declared war aim. Let me give you the 10-day architecture that produced this moment, because the sequence matters. February 28th, 2026, Day 1. The United States and Israel launch Operation Epic Fury. Joint precision strikes across more than 2,000 targets inside Iran. In the opening wave, a targeted strike on Tehran kills Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who governed the Islamic Republic for 37 years. The White House formally names the operation. The world enters immediate shock. March 1st through 4th. Iran retaliates with hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles directed at American military installations across the Gulf: Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq. 6 U.S. service members are killed. The Pentagon confirms the deaths. Oil prices breach $100 per barrel for the first time since 2020. March 5th through 7th. Trump publicly demands Iran's unconditional surrender. Iran's foreign minister refuses any negotiation framework on camera, stating Iran is operationally confident in its capacity to counter even a full-scale U.S. ground invasion. The conflict widens. Iranian strikes begin targeting civilian infrastructure across Gulf states. Bahrain's primary desalination facility is struck. Saudi Arabia reports its first confirmed fatalities. March 8th. Trump makes one of the most extraordinary public statements issued by any sitting American president in the modern diplomatic era. He states directly, "Khamenei's son is unacceptable to me. The next Iranian leader will not last long without my approval." A sitting president publicly attempting to dictate the leadership selection of a foreign sovereign nation, while that nation is actively conducting that very selection process. Hours later, defying Trump's warning with precise institutional deliberateness, Iran's assembly picks Mojtaba Khamenei. The IRGC pledges allegiance before the civilian government finishes processing the announcement. The plan designed to terminate the Islamic Republic hands it instead to a man assessed by every intelligence agency as more radical, more aggressive, and more extreme than the father America killed to prevent this exact outcome. March 9th, 2026. Day 10. The announcement broadcasts worldwide. By morning, the new supreme leader has spoken. Oil has spiked again. The seventh American is dead, and the documented pathway to any negotiated resolution, according to Reuters, Sky News, and analysts across every major geopolitical research institution, has closed. Now the three pieces of documented evidence that the coverage is failing to connect. First, the full inaugural address. The full transcript contains a specific Farsi phrase that did not appear in English reporting. It translates directly as a blow to America's face that history will permanently record. He did not characterize Iran's position as one of resistance. He listed the opening 10 days as an Iranian victory, itemizing the components with precision. Confirmed American military deaths, documented disruption of Gulf energy infrastructure, the forcing of U.S. diplomatic evacuation orders. He called those things victories, explicitly, in his first address as supreme leader, and then stated Iran's terminal objective, the complete withdrawal of all American military forces from the entire Middle East. That is a declared endpoint, not a negotiating position, from which no partial agreement can be constructed while Mojtaba Khamenei governs. Second, the IRGC Energy Warfare Declaration. Within hours of the confirmation, senior IRGC commander Ibrahim Zulfiqari issued a formal warning to every Gulf Arab government hosting American military assets. The statement contained two words that triggered immediate price movement across every energy market that opened afterward: energy war. In the Persian Gulf geographic context, those two words carry one operational meaning: the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which 20% of the world's daily petroleum supply physically transits. Brent crude opened March 9th at $100 per barrel, a 56% increase over the pre-war baseline of $64 in just 10 days. If the strait is disrupted even partially, every energy economist running the documented models projects Brent crude rising to between $140 and $180. American retail gasoline reaching between $7 and $9 per gallon within 30 days. That is not projection. That is the stress-tested modeled consequence of Hormuz disruption. And the IRGC is now using the precise language that has historically preceded closure attempts. Third, what the appointment reveals about who actually controls Iran. Mojtaba Khamenei does not hold the rank of Ayatollah. The entire constitutional framework of the Islamic Republic requires the supreme leader to be the highest-ranking Islamic jurist in the country. He studied at the QOM seminaries, but never achieved the scholarly rank that the Constitution his own father helped write requires for this position. Iran has installed a supreme leader who technically violates the constitutional architecture of the republic he now governs. And that constitutional breach tells you precisely who executed this installation. The IRGC placed a man they operationally control into the supreme leadership of a nation of 90 million people, while an active war with the United States is ongoing. That is not a leadership transition. That is the documented completion of an institutional takeover executed under live fire. Now, the biographical record. Because understanding who this man actually is explains why the intelligence community's assessment of him as more dangerous than his father is not analytical alarmism. It is the product of a 40-year documented operational record that most English-language coverage is summarizing in 2 sentences and then moving forward. Born September 8, 1969 in Mashhad, the spiritual and theological capital of Iranian Shia Islam. He was 9 years old when his father helped architect and lead the 1979 revolution that dismantled the US-backed Pahlavi monarchy. He absorbed the foundational experience of watching America's regional strategic architecture collapse before he reached adolescence. He was 18 when he served in the Iran-Iraq War. a conflict where declassified Defense Intelligence Agency documents confirm the United States provided Iraq with satellite battlefield planning intelligence, while Saddam Hussein's military simultaneously deployed chemical weapons against Iranian combatants. Mojtaba Khamenei was in uniform on the receiving end of that intelligence sharing. He was a teenager. He cataloged it. He studied Islamic theology at the QOM seminaries under Mahmoud Hashemi Shahrudi and under Ayatollah Mohammad Taghi Mesbah Yazdi, a cleric documented by the Council on Foreign Relations as having openly advocated lethal state responses to Iranian youth promoting Western cultural influence. That is not peripheral biographical context. That is the operating theological framework that shaped every subsequent decision he has made. He never held public office. He never gave press conferences. He never issued public statements. Iranian opposition research groups and Western intelligence analysts who studied him closely for decades described him consistently using one phrase: the ghost who runs everything. He controlled significant operational sections of the IRGC's intelligence apparatus. He held direct command influence over the Basiji, the paramilitary force that crushed the 2009 Green Movement with documented extraordinary violence. When millions of Iranians flooded the streets in the largest domestic uprising in the Republic's history, Mojtaba Khamenei reportedly personally directed the suppression operation. The movement was systematically dismantled, its organizational leadership imprisoned. Documented fatalities followed. The man who supervised that operation is now the supreme leader of Iran. For 27 consecutive years, from 1999 through 2026, he served as Deputy Chief of Staff to the Supreme Leader for Political and Security Affairs. That position made him the primary operational interface between Iran's supreme leadership and the IRGC command hierarchy for nearly 3 decades. He was their institutional bridge. He was not adjacent to Iranian power. He was the connective architecture of it. U.S. Treasury sanctioned him in 2019, specifically citing his direct role in advancing his father's regional destabilization operations and enabling the regime's domestic repression infrastructure. That sanction is now 7 years old. The man it targeted is now the supreme leader of Iran. And here's the detail, buried in paragraph 12 or 13 of most published background profiles, that the analytical consensus says matters more than anything else in his biography. He is assessed by Iran International, PBS NewsHour, Al Jazeera, and every intelligence-adjacent research institution that has published on him in the past 72 hours as more hardline than his father, more hardline than Ali Khamenei, the man who spent 37 years calling America the Great Satan, who funded Hezbollah's military infrastructure across Lebanon, who oversaw the construction of the ballistic missile program now actively striking American bases across the Gulf, who authorized the proxy networks that have killed American personnel across multiple conflict theaters over multiple decades. That man, by every documented analytical assessment, was less ideologically extreme than the son who just replaced him. Now, what nobody is covering with sufficient attention, the private diplomatic transmission. According to documented reporting from Iran International, Mojtaba Khamenei's first communication after formally assuming the supreme leadership was not his public inaugural address. It was a private message, delivered through back-channel diplomatic infrastructure to 2 specific governments. Not the United Nations, not regional neighbors, not the Swiss diplomatic intermediary managing Washington-Tehran communications. China and Russia received direct private notification first, before the public announcement had been fully processed by the international community. That pre-notification sequencing is the same pattern that strategic intelligence analysts identified in Iran's nuclear program escalation communications documented last month. You notify your strategic protectors before the public announcement when you need their immediate diplomatic cover in place before the global response forms. It tells you that Iran has already constructed a multi-layered international protective architecture, and the first operational act of the new supreme leader was to activate it, to signal Beijing and Moscow simultaneously that the new command structure was operational. before Washington had fully processed the strategic implications of what had just occurred. Iran is not entering the next phase of this conflict without external structural support, and Mojtaba Khamenei's opening move made that architecture visible to the two governments, whose public endorsement narrows every available American response option. Now the expert consensus, because this is where the professional analytical community has reached a conclusion that is not being communicated with sufficient clarity in the mainstream coverage. Jonathan Panikoff, director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council, speaking on CNBC on March 9th, Trump has a potential path to declaring operational victory today. Nuclear infrastructure has been struck. Ballistic missile facilities have been damaged. The regime's leadership has been eliminated once. A formal declaration of military success creates theoretical space for both sides to stop. That is a serious argument from a credible analyst, and it deserves to be taken seriously as a documented off-ramp possibility. Dr. Vali Nasser, Dean Emeritus of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, one of the most rigorously cited Iran scholars in the Western academic world, published his assessment this week using one specific word. The appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei closes the path to a swift end to the war. Not narrows, not complicates, closes. When one of the most respected Iran scholars in American academia uses a terminal verb, that is the professional consensus forming in documented real time. General Jack Keane, former Army Vice Chief of Staff and Fox News senior strategic analyst, the organizations sustaining Iran's governing structure are being systematically targeted. The intended outcome is regime change, but the regime is changing itself, and the direction it is choosing is more defiance, not less. When the most hawkish mainstream military analyst available is publicly acknowledging that the regime is adapting and consolidating rather than fragmenting and collapsing, the foundational war plan assumption has been falsified by the documented operational reality. Reuters, citing diplomatic sources, published this morning. Iran's selection of Mojtaba Khamenei appears to close the path to a swift end to the war. Sky News published simultaneously, his appointment does not bode well for peace. Neither Reuters nor Sky News traffics in analytical alarmism. When both publish identical terminal conclusions on the same morning, that is not coincidence. That is professional consensus documented in real time. And Trump's public response this morning, to the appointment he publicly tried to prevent, to the supreme leader he publicly designated unacceptable, to the outcome he publicly warned would not survive without his personal approval, was 4 words: "We'll see what happens." The president who promised Iran would be brought to its knees, whose operation was architecturally designed to produce regime change within 7 to 10 days, is responding to the exact outcome he publicly warned against with 4 words that communicate no strategy, no posture, no analytical framework, and no path. Here is the economic reality that translates every element of this into numbers that are already measurable in every American household this week. Oil opened March 9th at $100 per barrel. The pre-war price on February 27th was $64. That is a 56% price increase in 10 days. The national average for retail gasoline in America before Operation Epic Fury launched was $3.18 per gallon. If Brent crude sustains at current levels, every energy economist's documented model projects the national average reaching $4.50 within 30 days. If the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, that projection climbs to between $7 and $9. Airlines announced fare increases this morning. Shipping logistics companies issued cost increase notifications across every major supply corridor. Inflation that had finally demonstrated sustained deceleration is now accelerating again in real time. The Federal Reserve, which spent 2 years engineering a soft landing for the American economy, is now facing an energy-driven inflation spike it has no monetary policy tool to address without simultaneously suppressing growth. The economic damage from this conflict is not projected. It is being measured in every American's wallet this week, right now. The reality that the next 72 hours will determine is not abstract. It is the gap between a diplomatic off-ramp that still technically exists and a 30-day countdown clock that started moving on March 18th toward consequences that no administration communication strategy can manage once they activate.